Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. It's so great to have you all here today. And I also want to welcome folks who are watching from around the world via live stream. I am Erin Murphy, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Bid Officer for Boston 2024. It is terrific to be here at the BCEC, which will serve as the venue for Olympic boxing, Olympic and Paralympic indoor volleyball, and Olympic and Paralympic table tennis if Boston becomes the host for the 2024 Games. This morning, we are going to present what we call Bid 2.0, our new plan for hosting the 2024 Games. As Boston 2024's first official employee, I am so excited by how our bid is evolving. We are here because of a dream of two young guys, Eric Reddy and Corey Dinopoulos, who didn't know each other at the time, but fresh from watching the exciting London Games in 2012, shared a common goal of bringing the world's most loved sporting event to their hometown. Their passion attracted the interest and support of Greater Boston's leaders in government and business. The momentum that they started in 2012 launched Boston into a domestic competition 2 years later with 35 other US cities. And after months of putting together a proof of concept plan with a small staff, a shoestring budget, and a lot of pro bono help, Boston was chosen by the US Olympic Committee to represent the United States of America in the international race for the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Immediately after we were awarded that honor in January, we transitioned from proof of concept to significant information gathering. In the past 5 months, we have held 22 large community meetings and hundreds of smaller meetings and conversations with residents, community leaders, and neighborhood advocates. We have recruited about 4,000 volunteers and are having so much fun on evenings and weekends going out to youth sporting events to talk to kids, parents, and coaches about the potential of bringing the games here and to listen to their ideas. We have consulted with members of our board and advisory committees who have pushed us, supported us, challenged us, and lent us their expertise to help strengthen the plan. And 5 weeks ago, we asked Steve Pagliuca to become the chairman of Boston 2024. His first mission, to lead an effort to create a fact-based analysis of Boston's ability to host a privately funded games, an analysis with a level of detail not yet seen before at this stage of the bidding process. The deadline for that analysis, June 30th, so we're a day ahead of schedule. We have briefed the Walsh administration and the Baker administration on the plan, along with the leadership of the US Olympic Committee. We believe the plan aligns with the mayor's goals for the city in 2030 and with key city planning documents, such as the 2011 Columbia Point Master Plan. We also believe it reflects the priorities of the International Olympic Committee's Agenda 2020, which aims to reduce costs for host cities, ensuring the focus is on two things: the lasting benefits for Boston, and of course, the unifying power of sport. We have a long way to go before the summer of 2017, when the International Olympic Committee will choose a host city. But we have come a long way, and we are pleased to be able to share the details with you. Today, Steve Pagliuca will walk you through an executive summary of Bid 2.0, which provides new facts and aims to answer any questions that are still out there about whether Boston can and should host the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2024. Chief Architect David Manfredi will take you through the latest in our venue and legacy planning. And CEO Rich Davey will go into great detail about the important issues of transportation infrastructure and security, and what we actually need to host the Games. And even more detailed information on Bid 2.0 will be made available on our website, 2024boston.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of Boston 2024, Steve Pagliuca.
Thank you, Erin. I really appreciate it, and it's great to be here this morning, and it's been a fantastic turnout. Little did I know when my grandfather said I really had to get an accounting degree because those were the only people employed during the Depression, that I would have to use that accounting degree to analyze an Olympic bid. So I think he'd be very proud now. He was a shoemaker in New York, worked in a factory. And I really didn't want to be an accountant, but I had no choice because they wouldn't pay for my college unless I was. But here it is, 40 years later, and it's come to great use. Before I start, I really want to thank the staff, the volunteers, the 4,000 people that have been working on this for so long and so hard. 2024 has really turned into kind of an investment bank. It's 24 by 24. 24 by 7, everyone's in the office. They were there till 1 a.m. last night and got here very early this morning. So I want to thank that whole staff. I think they really live by the Carey Strug, push yourself further than you think you can go each and every day. That's what separates the good from the great. And I think we have a great plan here, a fantastic plan that I'll take you through. When you look at the plan and step back, and the reason I got involved was, on the face of it, this could be the largest economic development opportunity in our lifetimes, in my lifetime in Boston. I've seen many, many projects. I've been interested in economic development. With a close to $5 billion of revenue, this is going to bring a lot of jobs and a lot of housing and a lot of great things to the region. We'll specify that, and as Aaron said, we have all the details and backup. I'm going to take you through the top line. I really wanted to give David Manfredi's presentation, not mine. I'm doing the green eye shade thing, and I'll try to get through it quickly, and we'll go through the details later, but David's going to show you how that kind of comes to life. There are 5 things really that are tangible benefits, tangible and intangible benefits. The first is we can capitalize on the largest economic development opportunity in recent history. We have significant job creation. We have substantial increase in housing. The mayor has a plan for 50,000 units by 2030. We'll talk about what this does for that. And an incredible increase in city revenues that we can use for teachers, police, all the vital things that our city needs. Secondly, we're investing broadly in our communities, workforce development, youth development, and business opportunities. Third, catalyzing transportation. As you know from the crisis we had in the winter, we certainly need significant investment in our transportation system. And events like this tend to galvanize people around that and make sure that they get done. Fourth, highlight our innovation economy and world-class institutions. We're doing great in biotech. We're bringing technology back here, and this will put us on a world stage like no other. And finally, I think we've seen this in our thankful many championships here in Boston. We've been blessed to have many NBA championships. The Patriots have won, the Red Sox, I think more than any other city in the country. It's only fitting that we host an Olympic Games and get that spirit back with the whole community. In looking at that job creation, the Boston Foundation did a report, and that's on the left-hand side here, showing that it would create 4,100 construction jobs and support jobs for 6 years. That's about 24,000 jobs. Another 54,000 directly from the Games budget, and the Games budget is about $4.6 billion, and a lot of that is for direct employment in the 18 months to 2 years before the Games and during the Games. And then finally, with the Woodette Circle project, which will take 18 years to complete, it's a very ambitious project. It is about half the size of the Seaport project, the little more than half the size. Seaport is about 20 million square feet. I think they built 10 already. There's 5 more on the docket. This further out would be about 11 million square feet, and David will talk about that. That'll create another 2,200 jobs that we've calculated completing that project, 2025 and beyond, so 100,000 jobs. And that, I think, pales in comparison to many of the other programs out there. More exciting than that is the development of Woodette, plus the development of the Olympic Village that we'll talk about. We'll take areas that have a tax base now of $1 million and quickly get that in 2030 to $10 million, by 2040, $32 million, all the way up to $377 million. I hope the biotech community will have me alive at that point in 2080, so we can see the full fruition of $377 million coming into the city's coffers, which again can be used for vital services. So an amazing economic opportunity in terms of taxes. In terms of housing, the 2 major projects, first Woodette Circle, that'll be built on an 83-acre pad. It cost about $1.2 billion to build that pad by private development. I'll talk about that in a minute. That'll create 4,000 apartment units, 520 units of affordable housing, mixed-use development, and transit-oriented housing. It's very close to South Station, so it's a perfect place, and right now it's a very underutilized area, and David will take you through that quickly as well. Columbia Point will have 4,000 units, 1,000 student units, and 3,000 apartments, a minimum 390 units of affordable, 500 units of senior housing. And again, this 8,000 is close to 15% of the mayor's plan for 2030 and dovetails into those plans as we speak. The second set of benefits is really focusing on workforce development, youth development, and green space. David will talk about the green space that's created. And finally, economic opportunities. We want to make sure the games are shared by everyone in society. And these games, again, will bring in greater than $3 billion directly right into the area and create those jobs. And those jobs are for construction and for retail, consumer, all across the spectrum. So when you step back, economic development is critical and key for the region. I don't think there's any bigger project that can help that here. The community investment piece of it, the connectivity that David will talk about of taking this neighborhood, I think we're calling it Midtown for the lack of any other better term. It unites two neighborhoods of Boston. It completes the Emerald Necklace. It's going to give us parks and bike pathways. You'll see it's a very exciting program. It's going to increase our global profile, and finally, civic pride. Now let's talk about the key questions, and we'll cover those today. Rich is going to talk about transportation. David's going to talk about the venues, and I'm going to talk about the critical issue that everyone asks is, can we run a privately funded games with a surplus? And there's been a fair amount of doubt about that, given different Olympic experiences, but I think we're in a changed environment right now, and let me take you through that. And we've built this up. We had an original proof of concept, which was fantastic. It's a little bit like talking to an architect about, three architects about what kind of house do you want, and you get a concept. We're now driving that concept down into details from a very microeconomic level, ticket by ticket, venue by venue, and cost by cost. So let me tell you what we did and just frame it because it's a complex project. The first part of the project is to build an operating budget. And I'll go through the various components. There's four major components of Olympic revenue and say how we built that up from a bottoms-up basis and compared that to a tops-down basis to all the other games. So that's called the Olympic budget. The second piece is a capital budget in private investments. And so part of the beauty of this plan is there are two major capital projects in an Olympics. They're always the Olympic Village, which is normally the most costly capital project. That's costed out at $2.8 billion for us, and it will be over at Columbia Point. The second largest project is normally putting the base and getting a stadium in. We've minimized the cost of that because we're going to have a temporary stadium that's tried and true and proven. It'll create legacy value because we don't want to have a large stadium go up and not be used, so this is taken down, and then the land is used for the Waddell Circle project. But that whole platform and the whole project cost about $1.2 billion, and it'll be done under a master development agreement. So those are the two big capital projects. And then the third is infrastructure. There's infrastructure that goes along with this. We've tried to dovetail into the city's plan for infrastructure and the state's plan for infrastructure, and Rich will take us through that in great detail. And the questions there are, can the infrastructure handle it, and what has to be done for it to handle the Olympics? What do we do to really put this plan together? Well, we talked to a host of experts. We first started out with every previous organizer of games, London, Barcelona, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, and Los Angeles. We talked to them all and got a feel for the basic cost buckets and how they put it together. We really were fortunate in that they had a fantastic CFO for the London Games, and we talked to him directly, had over half a dozen meetings, hours and hours of meetings, and we really owe him a great debt of gratitude because he spent an awful lot of time with myself and all of our staff. Marty Mannion chipped in from Summit, and we dove down into every category of London and how they did it and how many people they had and what those people cost and how many hours they worked and what you have to do to stage a games. And so he was an unsung hero of this project. And I guess now he's a sung hero since I'm talking about him. We did a detailed revenue analysis, and we want to thank our friends from the USOC. They opened up the books. We dove into their experience in Olympic Games, on sponsorships, on tickets, on the whole panoply of revenues you can get from the Games. And we pressure tested that with the IOC, a database with the folks in Switzerland, and they were very helpful. Then we did our own analysis to look at the venues. It's very complicated because London, for example, had larger stadiums for certain events, so we had less tickets. I'll take you through the ticketing assumptions, which are critical, but we dove down ticket by ticket, venue by venue, and have a very good handle on that. In every case, we took a conservative assumption. So if we could plug in a high ticket price, we plugged in a lower ticket price. We comped these off all available data, and in every single category, which I'll show you, we took the highest expense possible and put contingencies on top of that. and we took very reasonable ticket prices, and we have some upside that we'll show, but we took a very conservative price for the tickets and the rest of those revenue categories. We then pressure tested that with a series of accountants and experts and management consultants, and we appreciate their time. There were a lot of volunteers in an effort to go over the plan over and over again. I think you're seeing I think this is literally, as Krista, our head of marketing, I don't know if this is plan 70, it's version 70 of the plan, as we pressure tested every number and every slide in this presentation. And I'm sure that this is not perfect. I'm sure there's some things we're going to have to adjust, but this thing has been looked at by a lot of people. We vetted the real estate projects with local and national companies to test their market rate viability. We engaged with opponents, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, and to really get their issues on the table, because I think the first thing you do in a project is you try to find all the holes in it, and there's no better people to talk to than the opponents about getting the holes. We're driving towards, this 2.0 is very detailed, but we're driving towards RFP level detail in the venue budgeting going forward. And we're continuing to review this with the Browder Group and the Office of Olympic Planning of the Mayor. I think this project has been fantastic in that it's been a great partnership with the state government, with the mayor. Their people have access to all of our data, access to our offices on a 24/7 basis. It's been very cooperative. They've added a lot to the plan. They tend not to be optimists, so they've definitely pointed out risks at every category. So when they point those risks out, we've made those numbers more conservative. But it's been a really great partnership. Very smart people, driven people, hardworking people. I think an example for public-private partnerships in the future. So that's what we did in the last 5 weeks. A great thing happened along the road to bidding for the 2024 games. The IOC passed the 2020 agenda. And that's a program that allows for more flexibility, responsiveness, and clarity in terms of staging in Olympic Games. That's very critical because under the old rules, you had to build certain size stadiums, you had to have events in a certain area, and it was very prescriptive. They looked at all that and they said, we're going to make this easier for cities to put in bids. That we'll have mid-sized cities can put in bids. If we keep going down the path we were going down, the games would just be too expensive and only the largest cities in the world can do them. This has opened up the opportunity for smaller cities like Hamburg and ourselves to bid on the games. We found out that was really for real when we went over to the IOC. We've seen it in the Tokyo project. They've taken out over $1 billion of cost just based on the flexibility that's allowed with the 2020 agenda. We're the first bidding group, and the group for 2024 is the first bidding group bidding formally under that agenda. And that agenda is going to be explicitly taken into account in terms of picking the winning bid. And I'll point you to the second point there. They're going to consult a third-party independent device to inform the bid's social, economic, sustainability needs in city evaluation, i.e. they want a bid that minimizes white elephants, that maximizes value for the community, for the neighborhoods, and leaves cities in better shape than when you came in. So that's key to the plan because that reduces costs, and we've seen an explosion in revenues. The reduced cost allows us to put together a detailed budget that actually shows a significant surplus. So let's go into the details quickly. 3 categories of revenues. The first one is broadcast and top sponsors. That's controlled by the IOC. That's their top sponsors, about 13 or 14 top sponsors. And the television revenue, the share that we get from their television revenue. They've given us that number, and all the other cities that number as $1.5 billion. It's interesting that number is close to as large as the total revenues for the Atlanta Games just in 1996. That shows you the explosion in revenues in sports, because again, that's about the size. Atlanta, I think, was $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion in total revenues. Just the top sponsor and TV broadcast revenues from the IOC allocated to us are $1.5 billion. The second category is tickets, and as I said, we built that up from a seat-by-seat basis. I'll go into a little more detail in a second. That's $1.25 billion. We think there's upside there because we haven't used techniques that Rio has used. Rio has more sessions than London had. We used the London number of sessions to be conservative. Sessions are like having double headers. If you have double headers, you have less sessions. If you price single games, you have more sessions. There's a lot of flexibility to go up in sessions. We haven't put that in there. We've used the same amount of sessions as London. There's other upside in that we've used $2,016 on pricing the tickets. It's about $136 on average, which is exactly the same as London. We haven't put inflation in there from 2016 and up. When you look at real ticket prices, they've been going up faster than inflation. So we think there's upside, and I'll talk about that there. But we think 1,250 is a conservative number on tickets. For domestic sponsors, we spent hours and hours with the USOC, went through the domestic sponsorship universe, their plans. Those have been exploding. They've been signing record deals for the Tokyo Games as we speak, as sports become the hottest thing to advertise in, and Olympic sports are the #1 watched program in the world. So we went through a detailed bottoms-up analysis. I think they already have close to a third of those sold. And so we have to fill in the rest, but they're very confident that that's a conservative and reasonable number, and they've vetted every sponsor and every number on that page. Finally, there's a smaller category of licensing, the torch relay, premium packages, and other. We've based those on previous games, Tokyo experience, past American experience. I think that is also a conservative number because working with people like the Red Sox and the Celtics and Patriots, we think we can come up with more new and exciting promotions, as all those organizations and the Bruins have done to increase promotional money. So when you look at it, the conservative base case for revenue is $4 billion, $4.8 billion, $405 billion, with just things that I'll call really identifiable, which is the ticketing. When we move forward on this plan, I'm going to chart that we will have a budget of 505 and say that we failed if we don't get more than the 4805. We're using 4805 here just to be conservative, to create more cushion in that if something goes wrong. But I think we're going to target over $5 billion because I got to believe we're going to be able to have the sessions. I got to believe the ticket prices are going to be more like they were historical and not stopped at 2016 numbers that we have in the plan. By the way, the tickets include affordable tickets and ticket programs for the citizens of Massachusetts. Quickly on the tickets, London had 8.2 million tickets as a base. We have 7.1 because our stadium is smaller. We will have a stadium that seats 69,000. I've asked it to be 69,001 so I can get a seat way at the top of it to squeeze me in there. But it's going to be 69,000. So our base tickets, because of stadium sizes, our venues were 7.1 million. That's kind of the bad news as we looked at that. The good news is post-London, they've added golf and rugby to the games, which creates another 600,000 tickets. So we've added that in. And then finally, the 2020 agenda is allowing us to do regional events. With regional events, we can use other venues that are larger than they had in London for baseball, basketball, and football across the Northeast Corridor, and that creates another 1.4 million tickets, which is great, and it also gives more accessibility to the Olympic Games for the entire region. You have to remember we're representing America, not only Boston. So that's our ticketing revenue. When you add all that up, 4805, now let's go into the expense side of the equation. And again, these expenses don't include the major capital projects of the Olympic Village, $2.8 billion, and the pad for Waddell Circle to create the pad for the stadium. They do include the smaller projects such as the Aquatic Center. So in that number of venue construction, there is right now a temporary aquatic center which will cost $70 million. We're looking for folks for reusability for a permanent home from that, and I think David will talk about each of these one by one. But that's kind of basically all the smaller stands and sites that you have to build irrespective of the large stadium. The Olympic Stadium, we will have a pad on Waddell Circle. That's a $1.2 billion economic development capital project. But the stadium itself, we've budgeted for $176 million. We've talked to companies that build these stadiums. You'll see a picture of one of those stadiums. We've put an extra 15% contingency in that, and all these projects have a contingency. I think it averages out somewhere plus or minus 5%, but we have 15% in for the Olympic Stadium. So within that budget, we have about 20-something million dollars that we don't have accounted for that's extra expense. Same thing in the venue construction. I think it's 5%. The Athletes Village is 3%, because the Athletes Village is really the extra cost of retrofitting after the games are over. So we have about 2.5 million contingency in there in the 90 million to retrofit those villages. So as you go down, there's a broadcast center. We rent broadcast space. We think that cost is aggressive, and it's going to come down because the broadcast center was originally in London proposed at 1 million square feet. They built they rented 1 million square feet or built it. They only needed 600,000. Technology has changed. We think that's going to be a much lower number by the time we have it, but we've budgeted for the whole rental of 1 million square feet for the center, and it's upfit at $51 million. Venue rental equipment, technology, very large budget for technology. It's hard to believe to spend $537 million for technology. We comped that off London, using Boston prices. We think there, again, is some room there to do that lower, but we put the full amount in. And game services is based on the number of people they had in London, how long they had them there. Workforce, the same, again, using Boston labor rates, support services, volunteers. One category I want to point out that I don't think they had in London was we budgeted $128 million for insurance. We'll talk about that later, but that's an insurance policy that'll be a kind of umbrella policy over the other construction insurances we have to make sure there is no significant risk of city or state funding for venues or for operating costs. The USOC share of the joint venture of the sponsorship revenue is in there. And then finally, municipal operations support, opening and closing ceremonies at $375 million for a total of $4,595 million. And that'll create a contingency or slash surplus. It's a surplus if we don't use the contingency. And again, for this budget, we have about $60 or $70 million inside the budget as contingency and another $210 million outside the budget. So you'd have to be $270 million off to exercise that. I think I talked about this already, but in terms of the capital side, $2.8 billion for the Athletes Village, $1.2 billion for the Widett Circle project. These projects will be taken on by master developers. They've been vetted and be at market rates. The interesting thing on that is that takes a huge amount of capital, gets it off the Olympic budget onto a private developer's budget. The private developers will be required to buy insurance, and that comes in several forms. There's surety bonds to make sure contractors are paid. And then there is capital projects insurance, which means the capital will be there to build it. So for example, in Vancouver, they didn't have that kind of insurance. They ran into an issue and the government had to put money in. We won't have that problem for these games because we have these sites individually insured at both levels. On top of that, we've been working with Mintz Levin. They've been very helpful. Megan Burke is here today, Bob Popio, in talking to insurance carriers about a global coverage policy. We baked in, we hope it won't cost $128 million. We hope it'll cost more like $100. Hopefully you can get it for $100. And it's going to be multiple layers of insurance to protect the taxpayers if anything goes wrong on the revenues or the expenses. So we believe we've taken a belt and suspenders approach that we have to first have conservative budgeting, secondly eat through a contingency of $210 million and another $60 inside the budget, and then thirdly, the surety bonds plus the individual insurances for the capital projects, that shouldn't affect us at all. And then finally an umbrella policy which, if needed, can reach into all these areas and make up any revenue or make up any operating cost shortfall, which we don't anticipate because we'd have to have an awful lot going wrong for that to happen. So we think the city and state are very well protected under this plan, and we budgeted lots of dollars to do that. As I said, we've worked closely with the governor and legislative leadership, and they've hired the Brattle Group, who's been in the offices, and we'll probably see them again today and tomorrow and the next day. The same with the mayor's office, Olympic Office of the Budget, and they're reviewing the insurances, the plans on a very detailed level, and pressure testing, as are we, and we welcome that because we want to make sure we get everything absolutely right. So that is a brief overview. We have more detail on that, and we'll answer questions later on that. But rest assured, every item has been looked at, built up again from a bottoms-up basis. David's going to talk about the fact that we retain the major concepts of making this be a compact games, and we've had a lot of community input. This is normal in games, and that community input has made these games better. The criticisms have made these games better. We welcome those. We're here. It's a group of citizens that really want to have the best thing for Massachusetts and for Boston. And so we should be all on the same page. And I'll talk at the end. I think this will allow us now to have the data to have a constructive discussion of what we think the risks and rewards of the games are. I think they're a winner. I think this is a winning plan. I think this will win ultimately versus all the other cities because it really fulfills the 2020 agenda. And as the USOC originally said, Boston is a heck of a place to have any kind of sporting event. So I'm going to turn it over to David at this point to talk about the venue plan.
Good morning, everybody. We were honored to have Boston selected back in January by the U.S. Olympic Committee as the candidate city for the Summer Games in 2024. Since then, we've had dozens of meetings in neighborhoods, in the communities of the Commonwealth. We've listened, we've learned, and we've had a very collaborative planning relationship with the United States Olympic Committee, and their input has been extraordinarily helpful. We've gone back and we've revisited every venue proposal, and we've run each of them through a series of key criteria. And while all of these criteria are important, I really want to emphasize, and you will see in this presentation, an emphasis and a focus on community support and legacy benefits. That these plans are durable, that they will leverage the catalytic power of the Olympic Games to make a better Boston, to make a better Commonwealth. We will show you today the revised venue proposal, which seeks to be responsive to every one of these criteria at each of the venue sites. As you can see from the map of the Commonwealth, there's been change, but the vast majority of venues are in Boston. In fact, there are 30 sports as well as the Olympic Village in the city of Boston. And the concept of two clusters, a waterfront cluster and a university cluster, is a constant. It has been our basic organizing principle from last fall, and it remains that organizing principle now. I want to take a moment to talk about the history of Boston. And that history has many chapters, but there are three storylines that are constant through the history of Boston. And they are the relationship of the city to its water. Second, our celebrated green spaces, which are anchored by Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace. And third, our diverse and very distinct neighborhoods in the city. And these three stories are always intertwined. The Emerald Necklace was begun at the end of the second half of the 1800s. It was envisioned as connective space, as a way to connect the public garden through Commonwealth Mall in the Back Bay to the Fens, on to Jamaica Pond, the Arnold Arboretum, and Franklin Park, and eventually out to the sea, out to what was called Marine Park, what we know as Moakley Park in Castle Island. It was never completed. 6 miles were built through Franklin Park, and it was built with a vision not only to make park space, which was a kind of relief in a growing city, but also to connect communities and to bring the inland neighborhoods, create more accessibility for those inland neighborhoods out to the waterfront. And it was also, it is today, an engineering marvel. Olmsted was dealing with water. And dealing with water, we say today, living with water, before that term was ever invented. Because remember, 2/3 of all of Boston is claimed tidelands. The Emerald Necklace is a network of park spaces that are cherished by the surrounding neighborhoods. And again, it was never completed. The completion was Columbia Road, which was designed to be a pleasure way. That's what Olmsted called it, a kind of partner to the Arbor Way and the Jamaica Way. And in fact, Olmsted called it Dorchester Way. The two major components of the venue plan, and Steve detailed them in their cost, the stadium and the village, they can be the catalyst for expanding the Emerald Necklace, for completing the Emerald Necklace, for increasing parkland, for enhancing access of those neighborhoods to the waterfront and connecting those neighborhoods. Both the stadium and the village represent enormous legacy opportunities for housing, as Steve mentioned, for open space, for connection and access to the water, for connectivity and accessibility for everyone. I'm going to start with the Olympic Stadium. Stadium obviously has two main missions. Number one, for opening and closing ceremonies, and for what the Olympics calls athletics, which we all know as track and field. We've proposed a temporary stadium on a site that we've referred to as Midtown, which is just a placeholder to give a name to a place that really has no identity today. It's a collection of different properties and different uses. A stadium at Midtown would serve as a catalyst for a new neighborhood between South Boston and the South End, connected by the Red Line to both the waterfront and to downtown Boston. As Steve mentioned, 4,000 units of new housing, including 500 affordable units, over 2 million square feet of office space, retail, restaurants, and hotel, and 15 acres of permanent open space. More importantly than any of those numbers, though, I think, is that it represents connections, real connections between neighborhoods and real connections to the waterfront and to our green spaces. In the summer of 2024, a temporary stadium with 69,000 seats would be the centerpiece of the games, connected by what we've called Olympic Boulevard to South Station. With the stadium as the first phase of development, there will also be the beginning of commercial development. And you're looking at a plan with the stadium. You can see Dorchester Avenue and West 4th Street. You can see the stadium, and up in the upper left-hand corner of that plan, the first 3 blocks of development that include residential, include office, include hotel, stores, and restaurants. And this begins to transform 83 acres in the heart of the city that generates very little tax revenue today to an area of substantial tax revenue, but also begins to make a place, to make a destination in the city. After the games, the stadium is disassembled. It will be gone in the fall of 24. And the Midtown Legacy Plan then envisions several phases of development, as Steve mentioned, over 20 years, 18 what we call smart blocks, meaning blocks of mixed use. This is about making a neighborhood, connecting to existing neighborhoods, and very complementary to the city's plan for the future of Dot Ave. And it's a resilient neighborhood. What we're doing is creating a platform at the elevation of West 4th Street. The MBTA's Cabot Yard bus facility will be located beneath that platform, but at an elevation approximately 10 feet higher than it is today, so it too will be resilient. All of the development will be above the city's datum for protection to storm surge. And it will be built out in phases, but 15 acres of park space remains. The practice fields from the Olympics and the actual footprint of the stadium itself. So that in the summer of 2030, a 14-year-old can run on the track that 2024's Usain Bolt will have run on and won a gold medal in the 100-meter dash. Over the course of the development and over the course of these several phases in these 18 blocks, we're making a new place. There's been many questions about a temporary stadium and what that really means. And so I'm going to show you a very short video, about 30 seconds, about the history of temporary and modular stadiums. And why are we interested? One, obviously, it's cost effective, but it's also sustainable. Somewhere between 95% and 100% of all of these component parts are reusable. And it's not just the Olympic Stadium for athletics, but it's also some of our other venues. And you can see the second important factor about temporary stadiums is they have very little impact on the land. And so when you return the space to its original use in some of our park spaces, you return it, you have the opportunity to return it better than you found it. And you see some significant stadiums of significant size hosting important events around the world. And so our proposal is a 69,000-seat temporary stadium. We've had the opportunity to consult with the 2 major builders of temporary and modular stadiums, the Noosley Group and the Arena Group, and you see some of their work around the country. They have had input into our engineering proposals, and they've had significant input into our financial plan that you will see in greater detail. I'm going to go to the Village second. The Village is at Columbia Point, is proposed to be at Columbia Point. And you know this site as well. It is controlled today by the University of Massachusetts, Boston, by the Commonwealth and by several private landowners. And again, the opportunity is to build a new, walkable, resilient, and transit-oriented community on the waterfront. This is 3,000 new residences, permanent, housing that includes 500 units of senior housing, affordable housing, and in addition to those 3,000 units, 2,000 beds for undergraduates, 700 beds for graduate students, approximately another 1,000 units. So, excuse me, a total of 4,000 units on this site. The key to this plan is the reconfiguration of Cay Circle and the introduction of complete streets, a kind of urban grid. What does that do? It does several important things. It really creates an opportunity to benefit existing traffic, which is very difficult today, make better traffic conditions both to the west, to the south, and to the north. But the other thing it does is it creates relief valves. It creates alternate routes to get around Cay Circle and to create better use of the land when all of these parcels are planned together. In the summer of 2024, this is a community of the world's greatest athletes. Temporary facilities will occupy the south end of Moakley Park for only a couple of months. The north end of the park will have already been renovated and will be fully accessible for the adjoining neighborhood throughout the Olympic events and the Olympic construction. And the plan is completely aligned with the city's plan. Steve mentioned it for Columbia Point, a plan that was developed by the BRA in concert with the community in 2011. This is really about placemaking. It's about creating better connections, connections both within this group of blocks to the waterfront, but also connections from the adjoining neighborhood in Dorchester to the waterfront, with new pedestrian ways, with visual access to the waterfront, with walking and biking paths, with a mix of uses. Like all good neighborhoods, there are diverse components. We've given them names. This is obviously a plan that will evolve over time and will evolve with the community and will evolve with the BRA and the City of Boston. But it's about making community spaces, about making main streets, about making opportunities for live-work kinds of spaces, art programs that can be shared with UMass Boston, about maker space and innovative space, and it's about resiliency. The proposal is basically to take this entire site and to raise it to an elevation, a new street elevation, that would be fully resilient to storm surge. And again, the games can be a catalyst for putting Boston on a path to resiliency like no other event that we can imagine. So when these two big pieces are in place, what do these do what do they contribute to the city of Boston? Well, there's 8,000 units of housing. There's resilient and sustainable community building. There's connectivity with the surrounding neighborhoods. And there's the opportunity to fulfill an open space vision, to use green space, to use parkland, to make the city more livable, to make better connections, to make green spaces more accessible for people to play and spaces for people to come together. It's the kind of legacy that the Agenda 2020 is all about. It's the kind of legacy the Olympic Games should be all about. I'm going to run through very quickly a number of other venues. At the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center here, the proposal has been revised to include only the 3 existing exhibit halls for boxing, for indoor volleyball, for table tennis, as well as for sitting volleyball and Paralympic table tennis. At Harvard, in iconic Harvard Stadium, archery would be located. And it's not just Harvard Stadium, but it's actually the surrounding playing fields or part of the surrounding playing fields that would be host to the preliminary rounds adjacent to Harvard's track and baseball fields. Northeastern University has been added to our university partners with historic Matthews Arena as the host for weightlifting and powerlifting, with the opportunity to really turn St. Botolph Street not only into a new front door for the university, but kind of a mini Olympic Boulevard in the heart of the city. The marathon finish is proposed for Copley Square, within about 100 feet of the finish line of our own Boston Marathon. And it would also be the finish line for road cycling. Squantum Park, oh, I'm sorry, I got myself out of order. Harambee Park. Harambee is a Swahili word. It means let's pull together. And it's quite an amazing place. It's 49 acres of City of Boston land. You can see Franklin Park just up in the left-hand corner of that slide. It's the home to several important programs, but it's the home not only to the Boys and Girls Clubs, but it's the home also to a very important sportsman's enrichment and tennis center. They run programs, one of which is called Volleys Against Violence, the other is called Match Point. What they do is they match Boston police officers with the youth in those surrounding neighborhoods of Franklin Park, Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, and Dorchester. And they teach tennis, and they teach skills of citizenship. And thousands of kids have gone through those programs, creating relationships that endure well beyond the education and the training for tennis. In 2024, we proposed tennis and wheelchair tennis. We proposed a legacy plan that would build 8 new outdoor tennis courts and a permanent 2,500-seat outdoor tennis arena that would be sponsored and supported by the United States Tennis Association for both amateur and professional tennis. And the renovation of Harambee Park with new play fields. We're showing soccer fields and we're showing an outdoor track, but the actual programming for Harambee will come from the neighborhood, will come from citizens groups who are invested in the success of Harambee. And so 2/3 of the park, more than 2/3 of the park, will always remain for those community uses, and Sportsman's Tennis and Enrichment Center is the benefit of the kind of catalytic effect that the Olympics can have. In the summer of '24, there's a 10,000-seat temporary outdoor arena, like you saw in that short video, as well as another 2,500-seat temporary arena, access from Talbot Avenue and from the Orange Line, and obviously the ability to make connections in parts of the city. At Franklin Park, we had originally proposed equestrian events and we had proposed the modern pentathlon. We still propose jumping, dressage, and eventing, as well as the modern pentathlon at White Stadium. White Stadium, which was built by the White Fund in the 40s, is really a beautiful piece of architecture, but clearly in decline. It suffered from a fire several years ago. All of the interior facilities are no longer usable. But in fact, the track is no longer usable because it's only 5 lanes and it can't be used for any interscholastic track meets in the city of Boston. And so the plan, the legacy plan, is for a new track and a new football stadium, but no new permanent structures. The east grandstands would be demolished and moved slightly to accommodate a 6-lane track and a new football field. The west grandstands would be renovated with all of the interior facilities. And the existing field events, the soccer field and the baseball field, which are on City of Boston property on the Emerald Necklace, would simply be renovated. We learned from the neighborhood how important Franklin Park is, how important it is as parkland space. And so there is no proposal for any permanent facilities at Franklin Park. In the summer of '24, the renovated White Stadium would be in place. We would propose to add another 10,000 seats for those equestrian events, some practice facilities, as well as for the modern pentathlon. Swimming for the modern pentathlon would go to the aquatic center. So again, no permanent structures, no pool at Franklin Park. Boston College is a new university partner for judo, Paralympic judo, and wrestling at Conti Forum. TD Garden, obviously a great venue, not only for basketball, but also for trampoline gymnastics and artistic gymnastics. And Squantum Park, pending a full review in Quincy, Squantum offers a fabulous site for beach volleyball. It's on the waterfront. It has, you can see UMass Boston in that slide, and you can see how close we are to the village. But there's also an important opportunity for Legacy Park. This is the old Squantum Air Base. There's an environmentally sensitive area, that big green space in the middle of the slide. The opportunity here is to create a new park, gain access to this waterfront for the public, create a visitor center, expand the existing the existing pier for ferry service both to downtown Boston and to Logan, and create some permanent legacy sports facilities like beach volleyball spaces, but you can also see soccer and other events there as well. And in the summer of 2024, again, a temporary stadium for 20,000 on the waterfront, overlooking the city of Boston, spectacular views, and again, think in terms of our criteria. The durability of a solution, the benefit to our bid, and the cost, all running through those several filters as we look at all of our venue opportunities. Minuteman Sports Club in Billerica and Burlington actually straddles the line. Minuteman Sports Club was built in the 40s. It's trained shooters, Olympic shooters for all of those years, for about 75 years. They actually came to us. They came to Boston 2024. They proposed Minuteman as the home for shooting. And many of the facilities that would be built here would actually be permanent. They're not a big footprint. They're not a big impact. But obviously, there's a benefit, again, to durability and to our criteria. Tsongas Center at UMass Lowell, which would be the home to Taekwondo, Paralympic Taekwondo, as well as fencing and wheelchair rugby on the Merrimack River on the campus of UMass Boston. And at Gillette Stadium, football, not Patriots football, but soccer, as well as rugby, on the same field with a capacity that the Patriots enjoy of 68,000. And in Worcester at DCU Center with a capacity of 13,000, we would host handball, Olympic handball. And in New Bedford, again, an opportunity that really came to Boston 2024. It came from U.S. Sailing, it came from the mayor of New Bedford, and it came from the citizens of New Bedford. The sailors want to sail in New Bedford. They want to sail in Buzzards Bay because of the wind, because of the water. And it's a fabulous opportunity because in New Bedford at Buzzards Bay is Fort Tabor, a historic site. It was built in the 1800s to protect the New Bedford whaling fleet. It was used during the Civil War. It was used during the Second World War. It's an opportunity, again, to expose one of the great historic sites, one of the great places in Massachusetts. And then the Deerfield River. We're looking at 3 different sites along the Deerfield River for kayak and canoe slalom. The beauty of the Deerfield is it has all of that elevation change that other Olympics have had to build. And so again, through our lens of cost, our lens of durability, the opportunity to create a kayak and canoe center that would be permanent here. Back in December, we produced a comparison of the Boston plan, the proof of concept plan, with other host cities from 1980 Moscow through 2020 Tokyo. Today's plan, and you can see it in the biggest letters there, 23 of 32 venues within 10 kilometers. That's the IOC's metric. But I think the more important metric there is 8.3 kilometers. That's the average distance between venues. And if you compare it with the other numbers up there, these are compact games. This is a compact plan. A second comparison, and the last one, is the size of Boston compared to some recent and some future Olympic cities, Tokyo, London, Rio, and what many think were the most successful and the most sustainable games in Barcelona. You can see at 125 kilometers, we are a small geographic city. But the new metric is the average distance from the village to the venue. Now, it's not the best on the list, but again, this plan is a plan for compact games. These are the Olympic Games and they're the Paralympic Games. The Olympics can be a catalyst for lots of things. I'll suggest one more, and an important initiative, a greater commitment to accessibility and to universal design across the city. I want to acknowledge Dr. Sherry Blauett, a three-time Olympian who is here in the front row this morning, and a member of the board. Sherry has led a group of Boston Olympians and Paralympians over the past year, really informing this plan, giving us the opportunity to see a venue plan through the eyes of the athletes. And that help has been absolutely invaluable. Thank you for your attention, and I introduce Rich Davey.
So thank you, David. I appreciate it. Again, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone out. So for transportation and security, as Steve mentioned, can the city and the state infrastructure handle the Olympic Games in 2024? Well, how did we go about answering that question? We did a few things over the last several months. First, we consulted with transportation experts and advocates who came to us with suggestions and ideas. We also talked to communities as well. As mentioned, we've been out listening and talking to a number of communities over the last weeks and months about what they thought was needed as well. We looked and quantified at summer population changes. There is a reason why next week you'll feel like traffic has been reduced in Boston, because in reality it will be. In July and August, ridership on the MBTA and traffic in Boston generally dropped by about 10%. We looked at what today's current capacity is. What does the T look like today, and how can they handle the system today? We then looked at a projection of 2024 without the games. Where do we think the MBTA and our transit system will be? Projected population and ridership growth. Then we looked at the impact of the games. For those 3 weeks, 4 weeks in the summer of 2024, what impact will our guests from around the world have on our transit system? Looked a little bit at the current status of what those transportation improvements can be, and then we'll give you a sense for what we believe our next steps are. So first, we looked at the current operation of the MBTA, and we overlaid that with what is the busiest day during the Olympic Games, which is day 8. It's by far the busiest in terms of schedule and in terms of venues in any city around the world. And then we pressure tested that analysis with our transit engineers at VHB. We consulted with a whole source of inputs from the MAPC and the Massachusetts Metropolitan Area Council, and other reports that have been published over the last couple of years that talk about what the expected growth should be in Boston by 2024. And then we looked at some key assumptions, both population growth and then a very moderate growth on the MBTA between now and 2024. So what did we find? Well, first, I should tell you this is not a real-time chart of my heart rate. This is what the T looks like today from a transportation planner's perspective. Today, on an average Thursday during the summer, the MBTA exceeds its transportation policy capacity by 26%. What does that mean? It means that the ride is not as comfortably crowded as it should be, that it is more crowded than it should be, which is good news for our transit system, but we have to be able to accommodate growing ridership in the future. So that's today. Tomorrow, with no improvements, status quo as of today, the MBTA will be 51% above its capacity in 2024, again, without the Olympic Games. You are beginning to get to a level of uncomfortable crowding, for sure. So if the MBTA is able to make investments, both that are in the pipeline and some suggested, which I will get into in a minute, with the games in 2024, it will be better than what the T service is today. And more importantly, it'll be better for the citizens and riders of the MBTA, both before and after the games. And what we've taken is a very conservative approach in these numbers. We have overlaid the busiest day of the Olympic Games, day 8, which happens to be a Saturday, and overlaid that on the busiest day of the T during the summer, which happens to be a Thursday. So this is the most conservative approach we've taken. We actually think the ride will be better. So what does the T need to do in order to handle the riderships of, again, 2024 and not necessarily the Olympics? Well, the good news is there are 4 large projects that are already paid for, underway, in procurement, in construction for that matter. The first is purchasing new red and orange line cars, critically needed. As we've often said, a third of the red line fleet was built in 1969. They're the oldest subway cars in the United States. And the T is well on their way to procuring new cars for both the red and orange line, and those will be delivered before 2024. 2 is their commuter rail procurement. They are winding down now almost a $500 million procurement to buy new locomotives and coaches, and those will all be in place to handle new commuter rail ridership. Local bus procurement. The T has a plan in place to procure buses on a rolling basis now to ensure their oldest vehicles are replaced on a regular basis. And power and transit upgrades, power and signal upgrades, on the green, red, and orange line. What does that mean? It means more reliability, and you're waiting not as long on the platform for a train to come by. However, in order for the T to ensure that it can handle the 2024 ridership, again, with or without the Olympic Games, 2 additional investments need to be made. First, on the Green Line. The Green Line today has a capacity to really only run 2-car Green Line trains. And for anyone who takes the Green Line in Boston, you know that 2-car trains are not enough to handle today's capacity, and we need it for the future capacity. So these additional improvements will allow the MBTA to run more 3-car trains during rush hour. And 2, for the Red Line, one of the main challenges for the Red Line is to be able to move more trains through quickly so there's less wait time on the platform. And these signal upgrades and power upgrades will allow the T to run more service during rush hour. In terms of the legacy, the future, what do we think that both the state, the city, and 2024 can do to bring and to ensure that the legacy that we leave behind is fully maximized, that economic growth is fully maximized in the future? So first is a new entrance and exit at the Broadway T station in South Boston to accommodate neighborhood growth and to ensure that there's safe egress from the one exit that there is today. 2 has been mentioned already, to ensure that we are complying with the Columbia Point Master Plan, which both the neighborhood and the city provided back in 2011. We're proposing improvements to the Kosciuszko Circle and improvements to the JFK T station. And then what will Boston 2024, the developers, bring to bear? A whole host of street improvements. We're proposing and we're very excited about this, a new commuter rail station at the Wadette Circle development, which would connect the Fairmont line, Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan to Wadette Circle, which we expect to be a new job engine in the city. And then what Boston 2024 delivers through our budget is not only, we hope, a legacy fund through the surplus that Steve described, but very tangible benefits to our communities. So we're improving our park space. We're leaving behind, as mentioned, a visitor center at Squantum Park. And we hope to be the catalyst and to pay for the completion of the Emerald Necklace along Columbia Road. So next steps in transportation. As we conclude and finalize our final venues, we will do a station-by-station, venue-by-venue overlay with the 17-day schedule of the Olympic Games and the 12-day schedule of the Paralympic Games to make sure that the transportation is adequate to move the folks in and around the city of Boston. But from a macro level, with those improvements that the T has to make anyways to accommodate ridership in 2024, we are confident that can be done. The other question we've heard often is, can we manage the security risk? And so we've taken some steps at Boston 2024 to make sure that we have the best advice and we can make the best decisions going forward as we prepare for the games in 2024. We're very pleased that Juliette Kayyem is chairing a group of experts who have deep and significant experience in security around the United States. Folks from the United States Secret Service, Homeland Security, and even a former commissioner here in Boston. who is helping advise us to ensure, again, that the appropriate security protocols are in place to make sure that we can run an efficient games and a safe games around the city of Boston. And we've often heard of this process that the federal government has set up for any Olympics that would occur in the United States, any Olympic Games. And so after 9/11, the National Special Security Event protocols were set up, which allowed Salt Lake City's games in 2002 to be overseen by the federal government in terms of security. And this is not uncommon. Super Bowl has had that, as well as major political and other events around the United States. So it's coordinating all of the federal, state, and local partners to ensure that the games are, again, the most efficient and the most secure for the athletes, for our visitors, and for the citizens of Boston. And so as we move forward, we'll continue to work with our partners and continue to work with our advisory group to make sure that that occurs. And now back to Steve. Steve?
Thank you, Rich. Really appreciate it. And David, fantastic job. Before we close, I just want to have a quick round of applause for John Fish, who we wouldn't be here without John Fish. John, against all odds, competing against cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, what was the third city? Washington, D.C. Against all odds, we won this. We wouldn't be here without John's vision. I was a little offended when he asked me to take this on, and he said, I think this phase of the project requires a frumpy, boring accountant. But, John's a pretty blunt guy, but a great guy. And really, now, however this ends up, if we win or don't win at the end, this has been an amazing exercise for the city of Boston and taking this planning and putting it in with the 2030 plan, working with the mayor's folks. Secondly, I'd like to say it's been a real pleasure to work with Governor Baker and Mayor Walsh. They're both very bright leaders. They have great people working with us. And we wouldn't be doing this unless we're going forward. This truly is I think, probably one of the world's largest public-private partnerships. And we should have totally transparent information. They're in our office. And they're going to make the right decision for the states. They're going to review the insurances, everything about this project to protect us all. And the people on this committee are really a group of citizens that both have a love of sports and the spirit of the Olympics, but secondly have a love of Boston and want the city to go forward. When you look at this plan, anybody who looks at this plan, if you can pull this plan off in a cost-effective manner, and we think we can from every piece of data we've looked at, it really will transform Boston. It'll take areas that are underdeveloped and make them developed. It'll increase the tax base for the city. If you want education, it's more money for education. It's more money for everything in the city, and it's going to really help working class people. It's going to do. If you listen to any politician, they want jobs, you want housing, and you want opportunities. This creates jobs, housing, and opportunities, probably bigger than any project that I've ever seen. And so I think no matter how this effort turns out, it's been a great effort. It was probably the snowstorm, I think, set us back. There's no question. The many snowstorms set us back. I think we've come back from that. We have the sun shining again. It's probably on us that we couldn't get the plan out fast enough. It's a very complicated plan as part of the process. We've kind of stayed out from talking to people because we said we really want to go out when we have something substantive down to a detailed level. Just to be clear, we've gone from 1.0, the concept, to 2.0. The next one will be 2.1, but there'll be less changes. But we'll show a map of all the venues. We don't have them all done. That's because there's no secrecy. We're in discussions with multiple people who want the venues, and we're negotiating what's best for the Olympics, what's best on the template that David shows, what's best for the Olympics, what's best for those sites. The state has been very excited to get these games a little bit out of the states. David has talked about the fact that it's still one of the most compact games ever, even though we've now benefited the rest of the state. So we think the process has been a win-win process. We think that getting all this data out there will allow us to have a constructive discussion, and a really constructive discussion, because no one on this committee and no one on the board wants to have an Olympics that's not going to leave Boston better off. No one wants to have an Olympics that causes any financial issues for Boston. We've used all the latest techniques, all the latest estimations to make sure that happen. Everyone has to look at it. They'll vote on it. The governor will weigh in. The mayor will weigh in. and we welcome that process. And in any case, it's been a fantastic effort. We look forward to driving forward. We're off to San Francisco tonight to share some of this with the USOC. I think they're going to be excited about it, and I look forward to getting back to Boston on Wednesday. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to moving ahead.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks to all of our speakers today. For viewers of the online broadcast, this concludes our presentation. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. As we prepare to submit our host city application on September 15th, we look forward to continuing the conversation about our revised plans, so please keep in touch with us.